So, tons of people want to know why I chose Kenya. This is personal to me, so it might not, vibe with whatever choice you're making. However, Diaspora Freedom Initiative started a long time ago in the United States, and our purpose was to create some kind of economic freedom for the community. And so we started with nonprofits, and we started with, we eventually evolved to like government contracting assistance and support and things of that nature. And then there was a census report that came out, and that census report had indicated that of all the Black-owned businesses, only 0.86% were in manufacturing. And so it started us on this quest to figure out how are we going to effectively bring manufacturing to the community in such a way that it can create generational wealth and economic empowerment for the community overall. And so, we saw that it was prohibitively priced to create manufacturing in the United States. And then we saw, how efficient it was in China, for example. And so we started trying to figure out what made the most sense. And there was a method that had a 100% success rate in the United States amongst minorities to give them economic power. And we had tried the first half of the method, which is to create an economic base, right? So we had created our economic base. We did it multiple times. One of the more famous attempts is Black Wall Street, and it was destroyed, by colonizers and oppressors and slavers, all right? And so this also happened to all the other ethnic groups, right? It's not like it was something that only happened to us. So if you go back and you look at Los Angeles, for example, the original Chinatown was burnt down multiple times, right? It was only until they took that economic center and attached it to a foreign GDP that it stuck. And that is the truth for all minority groups in the United States. It has a 100% success rate. And so, now and today you could say, oh, but China's powerful, the blah, 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 blah. But at the time that San Francisco Chinatown, right, they never rebuilt the LA one really, that San Francisco Chinatown took, and they connected, that economic activity back to, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and then later Taiwan, and then eventually mainland China. But back then, China's GDP was less than any African country, any individual African country had a better GDP than China back then, right? So it had nothing to do with the strength of the country. Little Havana, same thing. Cuba has never had any kind of strength in comparison to the United States. Didn't matter, still worked in the USA. There's a little Haiti, still worked in the United States. There's Little Italy. There's Southie Boston, which is essentially Irish town. All of these places were places that minority groups at the time utilized to gain political and economic power, and then wield that power in the American way to get some level of self-determination and freedom. We're the only ones who have not done that, right? And so we said, okay, duh, it has a 100% success rate. That's the way to go. So let's go ahead and do that. And as we were looking for places to kind of connect with, I was told about a Kenyan politician named Pio Gama Pinto. And Pio Gama and Malcolm X had this plan to give Black Americans a home base somewhere in Africa, and they had decided that that place might be Kenya. Right now, that's 60 years ago, right? But that had come up, and then a week or two after that had come up, my uncle was like, "Oh yeah, inviting you to my wedding. I'm getting married in Virginia Beach. By the way, she's a Kenyan, and then after the wedding, we're going to go to Kenya and see the other half of the family, essentially." And so that was super interesting. Like, so within 2 weeks, Kenya had come up twice. I was like, "All right, time to go." So we do that, go to the wedding in Virginia Beach. It was awesome. Then we fly out to Kenya, and see Kenya. And I remember feeling like, oh, I get it, right? 60 years later, obviously, I'm sure it wasn't the same thing Malcolm saw, but I remember thinking like, I understand. I see what Malcolm saw, like, I get it, this makes all the sense in the world. And so that really kind of leads into why we chose Kenya, because we had been to all these other places. And with the exception of Sierra Leone, that simply didn't have the infrastructure to do what we were looking to do, but it was a beautiful place with beautiful people and beautiful systems. All of the other places were incredibly abrasive and incredibly bureaucratic, right? And there's bureaucracy in Kenya too, but it's not excessive, at least, not from our position, right? So maybe that says something about the bureaucracy of Pennsylvania, I don't know. But for us, Kenya was the least bureaucratic. The people were the easiest to get along with, had similar education, spoke the same language, right? And so the learning curve was really, really light. And we didn't run into like ridiculous issues with like police officers, right? Like we had stopped in a place in Nigeria called Lekki. Lekki Phase 2, I think it was called. And we were going there to look into a pharmaceutical manufacturing company that, we had been hired to try and find them a home in Africa. Mind you, 2 of the founders of this company were Nigerian. We could not get that deal done. We had been stopped by police and they asked like, where are you from? Where are you from? And then you tell them, where you're from. And they're like, give me money, give me some money, give me something. And you're like, what? Out of nowhere for no reason. Togo, wasn't it for us. Ghana had no support. Like when we went, which is again years ago, over a decade ago, but it was like there was this kind of, we're asking people to come home, right? And yet we get there and there's nothing. There's no like diaspora bureau. There's nothing. And so that was like a letdown in and of itself. Egypt was easily the worst place ever on the entire continent. They had people who were pretending with like clipboards and whistles and uniforms, like pretending to be police on the way to the pyramids. And the real police were there and like not stopping them. In most places in the world, you can't pretend to be a cop, especially not in front of a cop, right? So that made it feel like the entire government was just disgustingly corrupt. And so like that didn't work out. And so, we're just, and again, this is just me, right? Maybe other people will enjoy that kind of thing. I don't know. But we came to Kenya and people like to paint like Africa with this broad brush, like it's all the same, right? And so we expected the police to be the same way. We had one interaction with a cop and it was a private driver that we had. And then with that one interaction, the private driver and the cop had to work it out, right? And I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. But that was it. Over the course of, more than a decade, most of that me just popping in and out and seeing what was going on. But, over the course of all of that, there was only ever one situation. And in order for that situation to have started, the driver had broken the law, right? So there was a legitimate reason for that cop to interact with that driver. And the cop never once said anything to us. He heard our accent. He knew that we were foreigner. He didn't say a word to us. He had words for the person who broke the law. They, rectified it whatever way they needed to rectify it. And that was it. He was gone, right? And so it was a completely different situation. And they used to have these scores, right? You do real due diligence, and they had these scores about ease of doing business score. It was an international score. Every country in the world ranked. Kenya had higher rankings than like Luxembourg, right? The ease of doing business here was way beyond any of the other countries that we visited. Now, we only visited 34 other countries. There are 54. So, there's a few countries that we had not visited, but way beyond any other country that we visited, even the countries that seem to have stronger infrastructure, like Seychelles, like Mauritius, that seem to have like a stronger infrastructure, they did not have an easier method of doing business, right? It was way more bureaucratic. And that's probably the number one problem on the continent as a whole, is unnecessary bureaucracy, right? But Kenya was definitely way above all the rest in terms of what we needed done. If I was younger, maybe I would have chosen South Africa That's like a little party type of place to go, maybe. I did like Lesotho because of the snow. I do like, it's interesting. Like, I like the beach and I like the beach life, but I come from a place that had, you know, deep snow drifts, and very close to the Poconos. I worked in the Poconos for a while. So I'm comfortable in like Alaska kind of weather. And Lesotho had, at least when we were there, they had like snow, they had ski slopes, they had all of that. Interesting is because it's a country that's surrounded by another country. So it's like a country inside of South Africa, but it's its own country. But it has like a lot of snow and it has like cold weather. You know, it was cool. I enjoyed it. But definitely for me, hands down, Kenya was absolutely number one. And probably the number one reason is the people. The people are utterly amazing, right? You're not gonna find better people anywhere in the world, quite frankly, right? So Kenyans are the best of the best as people. And then the government is making a good faith effort to attract real investment, right? You can't come to Kenya and get an investor permit with, you know, an LLC on paper that you made in your mama's basement after you paid $35 to the Department of State with a hope and a dream. No, you need $100,000 to get an investor permit. If you ain't got $100,000, you ain't opening no business here, right? They're not playing around with people when it comes to, you know, getting involved in the workforce, employing Kenyans, creating jobs. Like, it can't be a hope, a dream, and a prayer. You got to be for real. You got to be about it, right? And so I love that. I love that if I interact with somebody here and they have a G-class permit, they actually have the capital to do what it is they're talking about doing. It's not a hope, a dream, and a prayer, you know, where they're talking about this thing they've been dreaming about and never done anything toward in the last 20 years, right? So that's really cool because it makes this a place where you can build with other people. If you meet someone here who's doing legitimate business and they have a permit and everything is legal, they have the capital, you know, that was part of the requirement to get the permit. They have the capital necessary to do the business they're talking about doing. So you can build with people who are like-minded here, whereas you go to other places and there's a lot of people just talking and not doing nothing, right? Or there's a lot of people operating illegally, you know, which there used to be a lot of people operating illegally here, but they're about to all get caught because there's a new system called ETIMS. It's about to catch every last one of them and they're about to get deported, and more power to that. I support that 100%. So it does create a landscape where everyone that you interact with who's part of that landscape has already proven that they have the capital to execute. It's not just all talk, right? So definitely part of why I chose to come here. So if that resonates with you, maybe you need to come here. We shall see.